Hi, this is Kevin Bowersox from TwoThought. In today's lesson, we're going to continue our multi-part series on cross-site scripting. We're going to dive in and focus today on how we can prevent cross-site scripting with encoding. So let's see an example of what we're talking about. So here is a demo site that I'm working with, and you'll remember from the first lesson that we can create a portfolio. And then if I return to this site, the portfolio will display in this table. Let's quickly talk about how that is achieved. So if I take a look at my JSP, you'll see I'm using JSP-EL to display a request argument or request variable here, and it's being placed into my model with Spring so that I can add this portfolios attribute to the model, and it's actually I'm using Jackson to make a string version of some entities that I've returned. So I directly write that value to the page from that page attribute. And that's really where a problem comes in, because what can happen, let's say an attacker first ends the quote, and then they're going to end the script tag, and then they're going to start their own script tag, and here's where they can place their own alert, and they just simply need to close the script tag and they're good to go. So now once they enter this information into my site and we visit the site, there you can see they were able to pop that alert. In the real world, that's going to be something more malicious. And we want to learn how to prevent that. So let's take a look at how we can encode the data that is being written directly onto our JSP. So we want this value that's being written out to be encoded. Now it gets a little bit more complex because we are within a JavaScript tag. So not only do we have to contend with HTML encoding, we need to actually then parse out the encoded HTML string in order to build a JavaScript object. You'll see what I'm talking about in a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start within our controller method. And inside of this method, we are going to use the mapper. So we're going to create a new string called value, and then I'm going to remove the invocation of this method, and I will store it in a string. So basically, Spring Data is going to find all of my portfolios, and then Jackson's going to build it into a JSON string and store it in that string value. Now, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to build a new string, and that string is going to be constructed by using a JSON string encoder, and this is an object provided by the folks at Jackson. And what we're going to do here is we're going to quote as a string. So what this will do, let's say that we had a property within our JSON. Let's just say it's name, and that property for some reason is markup. So we have, let's say, an anchor tag, and then within that we have this attribute. Well, this is going to cause a problem because it's going to break your JSON. Because let's say here we have, some link, okay? And then actually what we need to have is the remainder of that anchor tag, and really this is our string ending. Well, what this method will go do is basically it's going to escape all of these, so the strings will not have an impact when they get written to the page or when they are read in JavaScript. So once we have done that, the next thing that we need to do is we're going to use the string escape utils class, and this is going to be from Apache Commons. And with this class, we're going to use escape HTML4. So this is going to HTML encode our string. So what does that mean? Well, let's head to the MDN reference. And when we talk about encoding HTML, we are replacing some restricted characters or some special characters with their HTML entities, particularly ones that are going to really break markup. So for example, if we need to if we need to display a less than sign on the page, let's say it's a math equation, like 3 is less than 4, and we need to display that on the page, if we just provide this character, it's going to get read as the beginning of a tag, and we don't want that happening. So what we do is we substitute the HTML entity in, and then when the browser is rendering the HTML, it sees that, it knows, hey, this is actually the less than sign, and it is not the beginning of a new tag. So in this way, we are able to display the appropriate characters instead of having them rendered as HTML. So let's return back. So now that we have this value, we're simply going to pass it back, and we're going to place that value into our model, and it's going to be stored under the portfolio's attribute. Now we have a little bit more work to do on our JSP. So the problem is this string is now encoded, and if we simply write that into our page, JavaScript is going to throw an error because it's not going to understand the encoding. So really what we need to do is get that back to a string. Now the first thing we're going to do is talk about what not to do. Some people will recommend leveraging jQuery, and they will recommend creating like a text area, and we need to add the tags there. So they'll say create a text area tag and then set the HTML and then immediately call .text. This is not a good way to go about it. Older versions of jQuery can have security concerns when using this approach. So what I recommend, I'm going to switch over to a simple decoder class that I actually found on Stack Overflow that recommends using native JavaScript to create a text area element, and then we set the inner HTML of that text area, and then we simply grab the value of that text area. And using this approach, we are able to safely grab our unencoded HTML from the string that we provided. So let's head back over, and we're going to get rid of that line of code because it's not as secure as we would like. And then what we're going to do is we're going to first use the JSON object, and we're going to use its parse method, because really what we're trying to do is get to a point where we have a string that contains our unencoded HTML. So now we're going to need to decode the string that has been encoded. And from there we're going to pass in our portfolios. You'll notice I'm quoting that to make it a string, and then we simply have all that go to our parse method. So let's quickly talk this through. This is going to display the portfolio's attribute, which contains an encoded JSON object, and it's been HTML encoded, so less than signs have been created or have been turned into the %LT. All the HTML entities are contained in this string. We now need to decode these since we are in JavaScript, and we use that decoder utility I showed you. At this point, we will have a string in JavaScript that has the decoded entities. Now, it's not markup, so it's not going to cause anything to be rendered by the browser. We take that string and then pass it to json.parse, and that's going to take that string and turn it into a JavaScript object. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and then restart my server, and at the same time I'm going to clear out my database of any previous tests that we ran, and then we're going to head back to the browser. And once we grab the page, we are going to run that test again. So if you'll remember, we closed the string, then we closed the script tag, then we opened another script tag, we put the alert in, and then from there we closed the script tag. And this was the string that exploited our cross-site scripting vulnerability last time. So I'm going to go ahead and save, and now we're going to re-render the page, and you'll notice that we do not get the alert because we have properly encoded the data that we were writing into our page, and that caused it not to be read by the browser. So if we take a look at where that's found within our markup, so here you can see the encoding. So there's the code we just wrote, and we get to see that attribute from our model get written directly into the page, and we can see that it is in fact encoded, and that's preventing any issues from occurring, and it's closing out that vulnerability we discovered in our page. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. This can be kind of tricky when you're encoding, de-encoding. There's definitely a lot to take into consideration when you think about how many technologies came into play here. Just take your time, think it through, and you'll be writing secure pages in no time. So thanks for joining me, and I hope you keep a lookout for the next lesson in this series.